people feel nothing, the hollow smile. There's a kind of person you meet who seems perfectly calm. They're not angry, they're not loud, they don't argue or lash out. They smile, they nod, they listen, but something about them feels wrong, like a room that's too quiet, like a house with no warmth. They're not distant, they're empty, and that's what makes them dangerous. You expect harm to come from rage, from shouting, from obvious cruelty, but the real danger often wears a softer mask, a mask of politeness, of patience, of perfect emotional control. And beneath that mask, nothing, not empathy, not remorse, not even curiosity, just a void wrapped in good manners. These people don't just avoid emotion, they erase it. And when you erase emotion, you erase consequence. Because without feeling, nothing is personal. Not your pain, not your love, not your loss. They can hurt you and sleep like a child afterward. Not because they're evil in a cartoonish way, but because they've disconnected from what makes them human. And here's the haunting part. They don't look dangerous. They're not the villain in the movie. They're the one who says everything's fine while twisting the knife. You don't notice it at first because they're reasonable, logical, chill. But over time, you start to feel it. Not in your brain, in your gut. A tightening, a tension, like your soul is flinching without knowing why. That's your warning. That's your inner alarm. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who explode. They're the ones who feel nothing while watching you burn. In the next part, we'll explore how this emotional detachment forms and why society often rewards it. The birth of numbness. Nobody is born empty. Every cold stare, every blank face you've ever seen, it started somewhere, usually in childhood. Not with violence, always, but with neglect, with emotional starvation. Imagine a child who cries, but no one comes. A child who speaks, but no one listens. A child who feels, but learns that feeling is a threat. So they adapt. They go quiet. They stop crying. They stop feeling. Because to survive in an unsafe emotional world, you don't just shut down, you shut off. It works. They get praised for being mature, for being easy, for being strong. But what they've actually done is vanish, piece by piece. They build a self that looks composed on the outside, but is hollow inside. And that hollowness doesn't just go away when they grow up. It follows them into friendships, into love, into power. Because the world doesn't teach them to feel again. The world rewards their numbness. Bosses love people who don't break down. Partners admire people who don't argue. Society respects people who keep it together. But what if keeping it together means keeping it buried? What if the very traits we admire, stoicism, calm, control, are sometimes just scars dressed up as strengths? The danger comes when they start believing the lie, that their numbness is not just protection, but perfection. They don't just ignore feelings. They dismiss people because of their feelings. You become too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And in doing so, they protect the one thing they cannot afford to confront, the original wound, the moment they decided that feeling equals danger. In the next part, we'll look at how this emotional deadness turns into manipulation and why you often won't realize it until it's too late. How numbness becomes control. It doesn't happen all at once. One day they realize people open up to them. People trust them, not because they're safe, but because they seem calm, unshaken, collected, predictable. That calm becomes their power. They don't yell, they don't threaten, they don't explode, they just withhold. They give just enough to make you feel seen, then take it away when you need it most. They don't fight, they vanish. They don't argue, they go cold. They don't criticize, they disappoint, silently, deeply, and without warning. This is emotional control at its most dangerous, because it doesn't look like control. It looks like space, it looks like respect, but that distance keeps you off balance, always reaching, always wondering, always doubting yourself. And that's how they stay in control, not by being louder than you, but by being emptier than you. You start apologizing for feeling. You question your gut. You shrink your joy, your sadness, your truth, just to keep the peace. But what peace? Peace should never cost your voice, or your presence, or your self-worth. The numb person doesn't need to argue. They let silence punish you. They use pauses like weapons. They delay responses just enough to make you anxious. They make compliments rare, so you crave them like water. They talk when they want to, not when you need to. They let you speak, and then leave you hanging in the absence of reply. It's not always what they say, it's what they don't say, what they don't do, what they withhold, so you start chasing. And chasing is the trick, because the more you pursue clarity, connection, honesty, the more you give them control. You're not needy, you're responding to starvation. And the worst part, they make you think the discomfort is your fault, that if you were just more stable, less sensitive, easier to love, everything would be fine. But the truth is, you're already living inside their defense mechanism. You're inside a system built not to connect, but to control. And because they never do anything wrong, it's hard to explain to others, hard to even explain to yourself, but you feel it, in your shrinking, in your exhaustion, in the way your world keeps getting quieter and smaller while they stay exactly the same. This isn't peace, it's submission, and it's how numbness becomes a weapon. In the next part, we'll explore the silent damage this creates and how to recognize when you've been emotionally disarmed. If this silence feels familiar, if you've ever wondered why you're the one always reaching, always adjusting, always shrinking, maybe it's time to pause, not to fix them, not to fight, but to finally ask yourself, what part of me still believes I deserve this? And if that question stirred something in you, then keep going. Stay with this, because the most powerful shift doesn't come from breaking things. It comes from finally choosing not to break yourself. We're not done yet, and neither are you. The silent damage. It starts small. You laugh a little less. You explain yourself a little more. You pause before sharing something that once came easily. At first, it looks like growth. You think you're becoming more emotionally intelligent, more mature, more measured, but what you're actually becoming is smaller. You start doubting your own reality, second-guessing your reactions, telling yourself, maybe I'm just too much. This is how numbness in someone else becomes confusion in you, because when the person in front of you feels nothing, you start feeling everything. You absorb their silence, you interpret their indifference, you fill in the blanks with self-blame, and slowly, your self-esteem doesn't just drop, it dissolves. You don't trust your instincts anymore. You seek validation where you once stood firm. You rehearse conversations that never happened and apologize for ones that did. You start needing proof of your own worth, and they never give it. Not clearly, not fully, just enough to keep you near, but never enough to help you heal. You might think, but they never hurt me. Look again. They hurt you by erasing the emotional map, by refusing to mirror back what you give, by making your tenderness feel like a liability. And the worst part, you start doing their job for them. You self-abandon, you self-correct, you self-silence, not because you want to, but because your nervous system has learned that connection with them is conditional. Be calm, and they stay. Be vulnerable, and they vanish. So you adjust, you contort, you shrink. You become a version of yourself that can survive their absence of feeling, and you call it love. But love doesn't ask you to vanish. Love doesn't reward your numbness. Love doesn't feel like walking on emotional glass. This isn't love. It's a trauma loop wearing perfume. And every day you stay inside it, you teach your body that peace means silence, that love means uncertainty, that you are too much for anyone to hold. But you're not too much. You're just with someone who offers too little. And maybe the worst wound isn't even what they do. It's what they don't. They don't comfort you. They don't celebrate you. They don't miss you when you're gone. They enjoy the quiet. And in that quiet, something inside you starts to die. Not with noise, not with pain, but with stillness. A slow fade of self, disguised as strength. You say, I'm strong because I don't need much. But maybe that's not strength. Maybe it's deprivation with lipstick. You weren't made to be tolerated. You were made to be met. In the next part, we'll explore how to recognize this pattern before it erodes your sense of self, and how to start reclaiming the voice you've been taught to bury. Remembering your voice. There comes a moment where the pain gets too quiet to ignore. Not loud, not dramatic, just persistent, like a whisper in your bones that says, "This isn't who you are." And maybe for the first time you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking, "Who taught me this was normal?" Because somewhere along the line, you were taught to doubt yourself, to make space for others but not for your own needs, to be grateful for crumbs and call it a feast. And maybe now, finally, you're waking up, not with rage, but with clarity. You're starting to see the distance wasn't peaceful, it was punishing. The silence wasn't safety, it was control. And the version of you that made it through that version is strong. But strength isn't the end of the story. Healing is. You don't have to keep proving your worth through endurance. You don't have to keep showing how much you can survive. You get to ask for softness. You get to want more. You get to reclaim the voice that was told, "You're too loud. You're too needy. You're too emotional." No, you're not too much. You've just been too quiet for too long. And when you start to speak again, not in volume, but in truth, the people who loved your silence will be uncomfortable. They'll say, "You've changed. You're selfish now. You used to be easier." But easier for who? You were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be whole. So start slow. Say what you mean, even if your voice shakes. Set boundaries, even if no one claps. Walk away, even if your knees tremble. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you were before the shrinking, who you are beneath the silence. You were never hard to love. You were just unheard. And now, you're listening to yourself again. That's the beginning of everything. In the final part, we'll explore how to stay grounded in this truth and what it means to love from wholeness instead of survival. Loving without losing yourself. You don't heal by pretending it didn't hurt. You heal by finally naming what did. And for many of us, the pain wasn't chaos. It was coldness. It was the emptiness in someone else's eyes when we were crying. It was being made to feel that feeling was the problem. But now you see it. You've stepped back enough to recognize it wasn't love that hurt you. It was the absence of it. And maybe now you're ready to ask the question that changes everything. What would it look like to love and stay whole? It would look like honesty. It would sound like boundaries. It would feel like breath. Not a high, not an obsession, just steadiness. You wouldn't have to earn peace. You'd be part of it. You wouldn't have to perform safety. You'd feel it in your bones. And when discomfort arises, as it will, you won't disappear into silence or shrink into survival. You'll stay present, curious, kind. You'll remember, disagreement isn't danger, feeling isn't failure, and this time, you won't confuse indifference for calm. You won't chase people who are emotionally absent and call it patience. You won't beg for scraps and call it compromise, because you've learned what real connection feels like, and it's not cold, it's warm, it holds you, it mirrors you, it welcomes the full weight of who you are, and most importantly, it lets you keep your voice. You won't just survive anymore, you'll participate, you'll speak without trembling, you'll feel without apologizing. You'll walk away when silence becomes cruelty dressed in restraint, not because you're bitter, because you're awake. You'll know that not everyone deserves access to your softness, that not every silence deserves to be filled, that peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth. And when you love again, because you will, it won't be as the version of you who had to hide. It'll be as someone who came back from emotional exile, someone who doesn't just feel deeply, but honors that depth. Because now you know, the most dangerous people feel nothing, but the most powerful people, they feel everything and still choose love. And this time, you're one of them.